Coming up on the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast.
For about 3 days a week, I really move heavy weight. So I'll do like a pressing movement and then a pull movement and a leg movement. And it's very easy to maintain muscle once you've built it. But if you're in a situation where you want to build muscle, you're going to have to put more time and effort into the gym, probably up to 3 hours a week, and then bump up your protein and your total calories. And then I just knew when I was younger, all I had to do is get enough protein, bump up my calories a little bit, and lift heavy weights, and then the muscle stuck on. I added muscle over time.
Hello, and welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I'm Brian Grin, and I'm here to give you actionable tips to get your body back to what it once was 5, 10, even 15 years ago. Each week, I'll give you an in-depth interview with a health expert from around the world to cut through the fluff and get you long-term sustainable results. This week, I interviewed research scientist and professor, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. We discussed all about exogenous ketones, how to achieve metabolic flexibility, along with intermittent ketosis, advantages and disadvantages of extended fasts, best ways to build muscle, ways to suppress hunger, and his one tip to get your body back to what it once was. This was a hard-hitting episode with Dr. Dominic. Lots of great tips and info that you can apply in your life. I really enjoyed interviewing him. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the show. All right. Welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. My name is Brian Grin and I have Dr. Dominic D'Agostino on. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Coming from sunny Florida, I'm definitely jealous here in Chicago.
Yeah, well, it was sunny yesterday. It's a little bit cloudy today, but yeah. Most days are pretty sunny here. That's why we're the Sunshine State.
And have you been there most of your life?
No, I never thought I'd live in Florida. Actually, I grew up in the Northeast, New Jersey, went to Rutgers University for undergrad and PhD, and then went to Ohio for a short fellowship training before moving to Florida in 2006. So my wife and I love it here. We got water on either side of the state. We got pond too. It's like, we like to be by water. We like this time of year is pretty nice too. Winter's nice too. Yeah. I kind of miss the seasons though.
I will say the seasons are nice because it makes you appreciate when you get some nice weather. If it's not 80 right. every day or, although you got some warm, you got really hot summers, but I'm sure you're used to that now.
It's not that bad. I talk to my parents quite often in New Jersey and they're like in the mid 90s and it'll be 90s here, but then it warms up and then it dumps rain later in the afternoon and it cools off like 20 degrees. And that's when I go outside and do like yard work and stuff at the end of the day, usually. I kind of like that pattern. So it's like steamy. Well, I don't like humidity, but it gets steamy during the day and then cools off pretty much every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I would take that over 20 below. Well, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your background? I know you're a research scientist, professor at USF, right?
Yep.
Maybe give them a little bit of background on how you got into the field that you got into.
Okay. Well, I was always very much into like working out and fitness and everything. And I majored in nutrition as an undergraduate at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And then as I kind of went down the nutrition path, I didn't see a whole lot of opportunities, I guess you would say. And then, so I double majored in biology. And during my junior year, I started doing research in a lab at the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. And that lab was like physiology and neuroscience. So I got pulled into neuroscience as the 90s were the decade of the brain. And I was very interested in neuroscience too. And did my PhD in neuroscience in physiology, neural control of autonomic regulation. So like what controls our breathing, like the brainstem mechanisms that control breathing, and also sympathetic tone. The C1 region of the brainstem actually controls our heart rate and sympathetic activity. So I was very interested in that. And then I was funded by the Department of Defense for my postdoctoral training to develop methods to enhance, in particular, Navy SEAL operators that use a specialized equipment called a rebreather developing protocols and technologies, I guess you could say, that would allow them to stay underwater longer, to be safer, and to enhance performance in these extreme environments. So our research is really about developing nutritional supplemental protocols to enhance the warfighter in extreme environments. Our lab has all these environmental chambers to create extreme environments, and then we test things and we break things, and we figure out what doesn't work and what does work, and then we track the stuff that does work into human applications.
What was the biggest thing in the breakthrough that you found from doing that research?
Well, I focused mostly on drugs. I'm in a pharmacology department.
Okay.
But then as I progressed through testing different drugs for anti-seizure effects, because oxygen toxicity produced seizures, discovered the ketogenic diet. And then the ketogenic diet was actually used when drugs for seizures fail. So I became interested in using this high-fat diet, although the military was like, no, fat will give everybody high cholesterol and they'll die of a heart attack. So they asked me to develop a ketogenic diet in a drug. And then we developed different technologies, ketone technologies like ketone esters and then ketone salts. So I was kind of the one, for better or for worse, to bring exogenous ketones to the market. And they definitely do have applications. I believe in many ways they're kind of oversold and overhyped, but I can tell you as a researcher that they definitely have neuroprotective applications and a wide variety of things. So the main breakthrough, I think, which basically changed the trajectory of my career, was testing exogenous ketones as an anti-seizure neuroprotective effect. And this is 2010. And it worked way better than any anticonvulsant drug that we had ever tested. So it was remarkable. And we published that. It was like a 600% protection against seizures under 5 atmospheres of oxygen, which is like super high. And yeah, to my knowledge, no drug can replicate this. And it was kind of interesting because it's something that you consume orally, and then it elevates a bioidentical molecules that our body makes, but we just have to fast for a week to elevate it to that level. Whereas if we take a drug-like supplement, it can elevate it within like 20 to 30 minutes. Wow. So we administer these compounds, and then, we did tons of animal studies, and now we're doing human clinical trials. So that was sort of like the breakthrough that kind of maybe put me on the map. And I'm a big fan of the ketogenic diet too. So I've been following the diet since 2009, and a modified version of the diet that's higher in protein. So we could talk a little bit about that. Yeah. But it's been a fun area of research. I'll say that for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine with ketone supplementation, like you mentioned, it's everyone catches on. There's a lot of supplements out there that are probably junk. What I know you've backed a few different companies. What sets them apart? And is this something that, like, for example, like, do you take this on a daily basis, or do you do this just on certain occasions?
Yeah, good question. I don't believe like everybody needs to be taking ketone supplements. And, I guess I have, I was going to say I have patents, but the university has patents that I'm the inventor on, and they own the technology. Then they license it to different companies. And I prefer, there's an exogenous ketone supplement on the market called Keto Start by Audacious Nutrition. We have done a lot of work on ketone esters, and that's one class of ketone supplements that continue to taste awful. What we have found out is that higher is not better. So if you can just boost your ketones by like 0.5 to 1 or 1.5 millimolar, which you can easily achieve with an electrolyte ketone salt. So an electrolytes would be sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, similar to the product Element that Rob Wolf has. So I use a product called Keto Start, which has the same electrolytes, but those electrolytes are bound to beta hydroxybutyrate. So first thing in the morning, I just take like a third of a pack of that, and it's like, boom, it's like the ketones and electrolyte hit your brain, and it's like ready to go. Yeah. So, not too many things you can feel. Creatine, you can feel, after about a week or so. I eat a lot of red meat, so it's very subtle. Caffeine, there's not a whole lot of things you could say, hey, you can take this and you can feel it. So
Right.
ketones are one of those things, but we're at the very nascent area of research on this. And when I was taking exercise physiology, which is probably the only class I got a C in
Uh-huh.
undergrad, I in the final exam, it was like name an ergogenic aid that is proven to enhance performance or something. And I wrote this whole like thing on creatine monohydrate, and it got like a big X through it. It said no, there's like no studies to back this up. And that was 1995, I think.
Oh, wow.
So the studies were just coming out. They were super compelling. And I think we're at like the 1995 stage of ketones here.
Oh,
I think
interesting.
ketones will kind of be the next. It'll take a while, but they definitely, it's a form of energy. So when you consume it, it's giving your body a form of energy that's not, elevating glucose, and it's having some remarkable signaling effects. So right before getting on, my student is actually extracting histones. So we're looking at the epigenetic effects. So
Mhm.
ketones, beta hydroxybutyrate, and maybe acetoacetate kick on epigenetic programs that can enhance genes associated with learning and neurogenesis. And we're applying this to disease states, but then again, they're activating enzymes and systems that could help the everyday person too. So
Oh,
that's a big thrust of what we're doing now, looking at the signaling and epigenetic effects of ketones.
oh, very cool. And I've gotten into this a little bit myself. I'm like yourself. I'm into fasting, into red meat, and I noticed some of your workouts. You got some good compound lifts that you do, these micro workouts, and maybe we can touch on that.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, God, I've been probably eating. I don't really like count carbs or even count calories, but I've been eating pretty low carb for a while now, and I was like, I got to start testing and seeing if I'm getting, some ketones in my blood. And I know you do. There's a few different ways to measure it. I've been using Keto Mojo with blood, and it is interesting. Obviously, when you get your insulin levels down, your glucose down, your ketones sort of is the inverse effect. Is this correct? Um,
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to describe it. There's an inverse relationship to ketones and glucose, especially if your tends to be high. And then your glucose will go down to a certain level, and then your ketones will kind of go to a certain level too. Um, so yeah, I actually use a breath ketone meter called Biosense. So
mhm.
that's one of them on the market. I like Keto Mojo too for the blood
Yeah.
meter. With most of the work that we've tested has been the Abbott Precision Extra device or the Freestyle, but we also do biological assays. We also take blood and do mass spec on it to measure ketones if we want to look at acetoacetate and acetone.
Mm.
Sometimes we'll look at all three ketones in the blood. That is tricky to do. You have to use a substance called sodium borobutyramide, which explodes if you if you
Mm.
tinker around it too much. So sometimes we do experiments where we need to measure all beta hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone. Which interestingly, there are commercial devices, blood, urine, and breath, respectively, for beta hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone. And they're all very useful under certain conditions. And people say blood is the gold standard, but I think for this community, when it comes to fat burning, what I know actually when it comes to seizure control too, when parents contact me and they said, they don't want to prick their kid's finger, breath acetone correlates probably much better with seizure control than blood.
Mm.
This is some of our early work actually led me to look at acetone. But you can be in a situation, I think the important thing for the audience here is that you can be in a situation where your blood beta hydroxybutyrate stays low, but your breath acetone is high. And that's because athletes tend to dispose of beta hydroxybutyrate in tissues because you're using it as fuel. Whereas, and it has to do with the redox state of the mitochondria, perhaps, and NAD levels and things like that. But the important thing is that if you have high acetone in breath, you are like a fat burning machine. And so
Mm.
all those carbons from the acetone is basically from the fat. Like if you're fasting, the fat from your body, and if you're eating a low carb, high fat, that's a combination of fat from your body and fat. So so your acetone is a really probably the most reliable marker for fat oxidation. And I guess put another way, if your acetone's elevated, you for sure are in a state of ketosis and you're burning a lot of fat. So, and it's easy to do in the long run. It's going to save you money just puffing into a device and getting a number, which is, the devices are pretty accurate now. So they weren't like that 10 years ago. And it took me a while to warm up to the Biosense device because I was blowing into it. And I was like, guys, it's not really, you told me it was going to correlate with beta hydroxybutyrate, and it was not. So I kind of lost enthusiasm for it. But then I started doing a little more research. Peter Attia, a friend of mine, was doing some research, and other people. And we realized that if you're in a calorie deficit or you're fasting, the acetone gets really high, but beta hydroxybutyrate tends to trend a little bit lower. Mm-hmm. And that's because your body's kind of using it for fuel and disposing it within a keto adapted state. But it was very, I guess, rewarding to basically see high ketones on the breath meter. And I knew for a fact that I was in a high fat burning state. Like you can taste ketones on your breath. Like there's just a feeling that you have, but my beta hydroxybutyrate was staying kind of low. So long story short, after a lot of different testing, the breath acetone device is pretty remarkable. It's kind of won me over the last couple of years.
Okay. So I'd have to try it. So there's, I guess, a few ways to do it, right? Blood, breath, and urine. And they're measuring the like 3 different ways that you can produce ketones. Does that sound right?
Yep. The blood measures primarily beta hydroxybutyrate. Okay. And that's kind of the form of ketones that's highest in circulation. And beta hydroxybutyrate needs to be converted back to acetoacetate to be used as an energy source. And it's usually in a ratio of like 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 beta hydroxybutyrate to acetoacetate. And then acetoacetate can spontaneously decarboxylate to acetone. And this is it's about 20% all the time. And then that acetone then becomes a very good surrogate, a very good marker for fat oxidation. And it seems to be, it doesn't fluctuate around that much because acetone is a polar molecule, but it's also slightly non-polar and can dissolve in tissues, and it gets into our lungs, and then we blow it out. So it's volatile, we blow it out, but it tends to distribute throughout the body. So it tends to be a more stable marker. And when you're in a very high fat oxidation state, it's going to be very high, where sometimes beta hydroxybutyrate could be low, and it's almost like a false, negative. It's like it's telling you even you are in a fat burning state, but some people are like, I'm checking my ketones and I'm not, and they'll tell me what they're eating or what they're doing. And I was like, no, you should be in ketosis, but their acetone's really high. Okay. And I was like, no, you are in a very high fat burning mode. And I think that's what we want as a community. We want to make sure we're burning fat for fuel for the majority of people. I mean, I work in the clinical world, and I think it's useful, beta hydroxybutyrate, in some contexts, but come to find out, breath acetone probably correlates better with seizure control than blood or even urine.
Okay, that's good to know, because I think when I first started measuring my ketones, I was like, God, that seems so low. Like I've been, I'm a pretty good, I don't like over fast, but I tend to fast quite a bit through the day. And I have my meals towards the end of the day. And I'm like, gosh, I thought I would be. And so that could explain it, like you mentioned. Maybe using the breath and the blood is the best way.
Mm-hmm. Urine's okay too. I communicate with quite a few neurologists, epileptologists, and their dietitians that use the urine in kids, mostly because you don't have to prick the finger. But they have told me, hey, the urine is like better than the blood, and the urine is acetoacetate, and which would correlate better with acetone. But urine's messy, and it's not very quantitative. It's like semi-quantitative. But like a breath acetone device, like the Biosense, there's other devices out there too. The Biosense tends to be more accurate. It goes like 0 to 40, and then 10 ACEs as the units will correlate kind of to 1 millimole beta hydroxybutyrate. But if you're in a calorie deficit, there tends to be a decoupling of that, whereas you could have like 30 or 40 ACE, and I can max out this device, and then my blood beta hydroxybutyrate is only like 1 or 2, even in a very high fasted state. So from a day-to-day use, ketones can fluctuate a lot. So measuring them, especially when you're starting a diet 3 or 4 times a day, which is pretty easy to do when you're blowing and not having to have a pin cushion for your finger. Is very easy and cost effective. And then there's an app associated with the BioSense device that is kind of cool because you can like compare it with your, you can track a meal and you can see what it does in response to a meal, or if you're fasting, and the app's very useful too. So it's a very user friendly, but it's also permeating the clinical world. So it's a class 1 FDA device used clinically, but I think the company is trying to, get more general users on board too, as they're doing a lot of clinical research with it.
Yeah. And I'm sure people who are listening who have never done any of this is probably like a foreign language a little bit to them, but maybe tell the audience what would be the advantages of doing this? And is this something, I know you've talked a little bit about like metabolic flexibility. Is that the ultimate goal, is to sort of switch in throughout fuel sources, glucose and ketones?
Yeah, good question. It is the only way we're going to produce ketones is if we're burning fat as an energy source. So the traditional standard American diet, basically recommends eating carbohydrates in multiple meals throughout the day. And in this way, you will never really produce any ketones. And I think you could probably make the statement, it's some people who make the statement, it's unnatural to be in ketosis all the time. And I tend to agree with that. Although I tend to be in a state of mild ketosis, and then we also have, there's people who have epilepsy or other disorders who have been on a ketogenic diet for 30 years nonstop, and they're doing fantastic. So I'm not sure it's dangerous, but I don't think it's sort of something you'd find in nature all the time. But in nature, there was definitely limited carbohydrate availability. So carb restriction is a natural thing to do. And then there would be intermittent periods of food availability. So not fasting would be very unnatural to do that. So when I do intermittent fasting or time restricted feeding, which is the term used in science, I tend to lose too much weight because my metabolism is pretty fast. So like today I'm doing it, actually I have not done it in about 3 or 4 weeks because I've been trying to gain some weight back. Because I was traveling, and then my wife and I got COVID, and I just like didn't eat anything. And although we bounced back quick, and it's just like, I realized, well, my weight's been slipping over the years. So I'm trying to build my weight back up, which involves eating breakfast, really. And so I've been doing that for a while. But if I did intermittent fasting all the time, I feel that it would take away some of the benefits. So I just do it, just occasionally. And that helps promote metabolic flexibility. So whenever you go without food for a while, you're tapping into your fat-derived, adipose stores, and you're using fat, and you're going to be making ketones. So bumping your ketone levels up a couple times a month would be a very simple thing you could do to promote metabolic flexibility and to improve pretty much every biomarker that is important. And that could be, your glucose, your hemoglobin A1C, your insulin, your blood pressure, all these things, your triglycerides go down. All these things improve remarkably simply by, periodically, like carb restriction, and then periodically doing. If you don't like carb restriction, you could do intermittent fasting.
Yeah. And I noticed you posted about doing a 72-hour like modified fast. Maybe explain that to the audience. I mean, this is maybe something that you've probably built up to this point, right? Like I always recommend sort of, you got to ease your way into fasting. And once you've been doing it for a while, then you can maybe do some longer fasts. Was that something that you did?
In the early days, I got very intrigued by the work of Dr. George Cahill, and he was still alive when we connected years ago, and Dr. Theodore Van Italy and Dr. Richard Veach, and they had done some seminal work on fasting and starvation. And I became interested in fasting for 7 days and as a way to elevate ketones and sustain it. And this is kind of when I was tinkering with exogenous ketones too, and I was testing them under different certain conditions. So I did a lot of fasting over the years, going back to like 2009 or 10. And 7-day fast and 5-day fast suppress my hormones. So my testosterone goes through the floor. I feel that it's shutting down my metabolism. Body temperature drops a little bit. It's great if you want to fast before like breath hold diving. It makes your metabolism so efficient by turning down your metabolic engine. Your sympathetic nervous system goes down, parasympathetic goes up, heart rate goes down. All these things kind of go down and it allows you to hold your breath for a long time. So I was interested in doing that. But a 3-day fast can put your body into a metabolic state by suppressing insulin so much it becomes hard to measure. And then your ketones, at about 3 days, your ketones come up to the level of your glucose. And we call that a glucose ketone index of 1, meaning that glucose comes down to about like 3.5, 3 or 3. And then ketones will come up to, beta hydroxybutyrate will come up to about 3 or 3.5. And in millimolar concentrations, that's a glucose ketone index of 1. And I would suspect, although we have not measured autophagy in humans, we tend to look at the autophagosome and LC3 and things in mice. My best guess is that when you achieve a glucose ketone index of 1 and hold that for about 24 hours, you're kicking on a lot of autophagy, beneficial autophagy and stem cell production. And then, a lot of benefits come from doing that. Although if you go beyond 3 days, then you start to see suppression of hormones and things like that. And it takes a while for that to come back. It takes like an equal amount of time or a week or two. And then I also notice my strength will dip, not at the end of the fast, but the days following. I notice a measurable decrease in my strength with a 5-day or 7-day fast. Not at the end of the fast, but in the period after. It's almost like it takes your body some time to recover. So long story short, 3-day fasts seem to be the sweet spot for me. And I do them occasionally every couple months as like a metabolic reset. And it's also very, if someone wants to, and I've talked about this with like Tim Ferriss and other things, wants to purge your body of potentially precancerous cells or kind of reset their insulin sensitivity and stimulate autophagy, maybe promote longevity, although the science needs to catch up with that statement. They could do a 3-day fast, and if you are overweight and you have some weight to lose, then you can extend that to 5 days or maybe in 7 days. And people that are really heavy have communicated with me and they're fine with like 10 days or 14 days. I'm not advocating that, but the more fat you have, the easier it would be to fast.
Yeah. And I was going to say that, so that was your sort of self-experimentation. You found the sweet spot, at least for you, was 3 days. And obviously you're fairly lean, and I don't know what your body fat percentage is, but I'm sure it's pretty solid, pretty solid. But for some people, like I know I had Dr. Jason Fung on, and we talked about, they do some extended fast beyond that for maybe people who need it, like you said, are, morbidly overweight.
Yeah, I'm definitely not trying to lose fat. My weight has slipped over the years. I used to maintain like 230, 240 for many years. I was really into lifting. Now I stay like 215-ish, 210. I'm kind of tall, like over 6 foot. So at that weight, like I'm not big, like I kind of have a normal frame. Very much into working out, although probably don't lift weights more than an hour a week total time. Tend to do a lot of activities outside, heavy work activities, lifting a lot of things, cutting logs, moving, shoveling poop from the cows, stuff like that. And just, kind of heavy work. And that's like my active recovery and cardio. And then for about 3 days a week, I really move heavy weight. So I'll do like a pressing movement and then a pull movement and a leg movement. And it's very easy to maintain muscle once you've built it. But if you're in a situation where you want to build muscle, you're going to have to put more time and effort into the gym, probably up to 3 hours a week, and then bump up your protein and your total calories. And then I just knew when I was younger, all I had to do is get enough protein, bump up my calories a little bit, and lift heavy weights, and then the muscle stuck on. I added muscle over time. So
Yeah, I noticed I love how you do these micro workouts. A buddy of mine, Brad Kearns, talks a lot about that. And
I know Brad. Yeah, he's a great guy. Yeah.
yeah, he's great. And uh, I love that idea. I just think that, and I'm sure you do too, obviously, a 15-minute workout. I mean, who can't do that? And like, you sort of get rid of the excuses, right?
Yeah. I have a chin up bar thing. It's not in my door now because closed, but I just throw it up in the door frame. And between Zoom meetings or virtual teaching or whatever, if I'm in my home office, I'll just bang out a set of chins and get right back to it, or do some push-ups and things like that. If it's a day that I don't have time to work out or something, or getting to the gym. So,
Right. So
and
you'll do,
I don't go to a gym. I go to the barn, which has weights in it, and that's my gym. So I haven't
yeah,
been to the gym in many years.
yeah. No, that's nice. And I know. So you do a push, pull, and a leg split. Is that right?
Yeah, it's very dependent upon like my routine. So sometimes I will do, push pull together, but usually like a push workout, a pull workout, and a leg workout, and then maybe I'll add an accessory exercise that I'll do in between those sets. And then I rotate the exercises. So the last time I squatted, so the next time for legs, I'll do a hex bar deadlift.
Mm.
And then on back day, instead of doing like deadlifts, I'll do like a bent over row or like a one arm row or something like that. So, but it's like I like put full attention and focus into like one exercise, and then that becomes like all day. If I know I'm going to work out, it'll be like, you know,
Do you do fasted
315
workouts?
for 8, 315 for 8. So it's like I will have this certain rep range and weight that I want to do, and that'll be my goal for the day. And I'll
Okay.
lock that thought in my mind, and I'll have that. Like when I was younger, I did periodization, so I knew exactly what I was going to do. I used a periodization template for powerlifting, and I would like look at it the night before I went to bed. I would sleep on it, and then I'd be like totally amped up and ready to do it once I hit the gym. Like it was lifting's very mental for me
Yeah.
too, and I think it's kind of an escape in many ways. But
Yeah. Do you do your workouts in a fasted state? I know you're obviously now you're trying to bulk up, so you're having breakfast and stuff. So probably right now you're not. But is that something that you mess around with?
yeah, I get that question a lot. I do not like to work out on a full stomach, that's for sure. So typically it'll be, 4 to 8 hours after I've eaten. And if it's like a deadlift or squat workout, like sometimes it'll be 12 hours, sometimes it'll be completely fasted. Um, but for pressing movements, I like to have some food and sodium and water in me, and that I feel a little bit fuller. I get more of a like a cushion rebound effect, for that. Whereas if I'm a little bit energy depleted and flat, then I don't have that pressing power, but my like leg strength and back strength seems to not be affected if I'm in a fasted state.
And yeah, I know you talk a little bit about this intermittent ketosis. And maybe explain to individuals what this is. You might have already mentioned how maybe you just take a certain period during a month and get into ketosis, and obviously that has benefits in its own. Is that what you mean by intermittent ketosis?
Yeah, I would say for me personally, and it has to do in part because I'm a researcher, a ketogenic diet researcher, and exogenous ketones, and we also do calorie restriction fasting and things like that. I stay in some state of ketosis pretty much all the time, but it can fluctuate from very low to a little bit higher if I'm testing something. But I think for the majority of people, it's not very practical to be on a ketogenic diet all the time. I mean, you probably find it easy to do low carb, but low carb will not necessarily put you in a state of ketosis. We do know experimentally, and this goes beyond animal models, that having elevated beta hydroxybutyrate, even to 1 millimolar, or breath acetone, 10 or 20 ACEs on the breath meter, can give you additional benefits. So there are like beta hydroxybutyrate has anti-inflammatory effect. It's almost like taking an NSAID, once your ketones get up into that 1 to 2 to 3 range, has remarkable inflammatory activity. We are studying epigenetic effects. So it's turning on gene transcription of things that can help, neurological repair, learning and memory, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So these are things we study in the lab. And the more research I do in the lab and see the benefits in animal models, and I cautiously always say animal models are informative, but not always predictive of what's going to happen in humans. But when you put animals on a ketogenic diet and you implant tumors and you see after a certain amount of days, like all the animals on a standard diet have died because of tumor hypergrowth, whereas the tumors are suppressed and growing slower in a ketogenic diet. Or you see, they have a neurological disease and they do so much better on a ketogenic diet, that tends to influence your decisions on dietary preference. The more you do this kind of research, even though it's
well, you're in it day in, day out. So I don't, I can see why, you make it a lifestyle. You make it a part of your lifestyle. But what carbs, when you do have carbs, if you do, I'm assuming you have them from time to time, what carbs do you prefer?
Yeah. Last night, this is the longest time I actually went without blueberries, and just the winery next door to us is having a blueberry festival this weekend. So actually my wife bought blueberries yesterday, but I went a week without. So every night I do typically 3 meals, like a high protein keto meal in the morning, though I didn't eat yet. And then lunch, I might skip lunch, but otherwise I might have high protein keto meal. So keto, low carb. So my dinner would be low carb. And the dinner usually is, we love Brussels sprouts, asparagus, broccoli, sometimes cauliflower, make cauliflower mash. And then we have some kind of meat or fish. I love fish. But we have beef. We live in we have cows. We don't keep our own cows, but we have a lot of access to completely grass-fed meat around us. I've been eating a lot of turkey. We have farms near us that have turkey eggs and turkeys and things like that. So typically meat, a big salad. And then I do tend to snack a lot at night. And I know they say eating at night is not good, but I've always done this. That's how I gained weight when I was younger. I would just come home from school, it'd be 10 o'clock at night to 11, and I would just make this massive bowl of oatmeal and throw in tons of chocolate protein powder and just eat it right before bed. And that always worked for me. I always slept great. But now I tend to try to get my food, the majority of food in probably throughout the earlier hours. But I snack pretty much every night, and I have ketogenic ice cream. There's Killer Creamery is very good. Rebel ice cream.
I think I've heard of them.
I make a mousse where I take sour cream and I put cocoa powder in it and some stevia and then blueberries and then cinnamon, and then I stir it all up, and then I eat it really slow. And we usually
sounds good. I'm gonna have to get that recipe from you.
Yeah, it's so easy to make, and it's just we get a good quality sour cream we buy, and then a good quality dark chocolate baking cocoa, not too much because that could have a little bit of caffeine in it. I try to avoid caffeine after about 1 p.m. And then some wild blueberries I put in it. But it's not an insignificant amount of blueberries. It's about a cup, which is 30 grams of carbs, but the wild is almost 1/3 fiber. So it comes out to only 20 grams of net carbs. And, I wake up, and then it's in sour cream, and I wear a continuous glucose monitor, and it's completely flat when I do that. And sometimes I throw in some collagen powder and stuff too, or some protein powder. And then I eat that for my snack at night. It's very satiating. I have good, stable, but low glucose throughout the night. And, I've been doing, it's almost I'm almost fat and carb backfeeding. Throughout the day, I get so busy and so immersed into my work that I undereat. So I have to make up for the calorie. And gaining or losing weight is all about a calorie deficit. So, I do believe calories matter. And I think the type of food we matter too. The type of food we matters tremendously. But if you want to get lean and you want to gain muscle, lose fat or build, you really have to pay attention to total calories. And then adjust based upon, weight stability. If you track your calories and after 2 weeks you haven't gained or lost weight, then you adjust it. For me, what I do is like, if I want to lose weight, I do a 20% reduction in calories, only like 2 or 3 times a week. And then the weight comes off and I start seeing like abs and start getting like veins. And just after doing that for like a couple of weeks. And if I want to gain, I usually do it by titrating in more protein from like 1.5 grams per kilogram to 2 grams per kilogram. So for me, I'm 100 kilograms. So it's like 200 grams of protein a day. I'll bump it up if I want to gain and put on some muscle.
Okay. Yeah. I love hearing people's routines and what they do. I'm similar. I like to backload carbs. And if I have meals in the middle of the day, mainly protein and some fat. Are you using a lot of like, I keep hearing about, C8 MCT oil. What are your thoughts around that? And, I had a conversation with Melanie Avalon, and she's like, this is like the godsend of, if you sprinkle this on. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts about, because you're starting to see it in the market all the time.
Yeah, well, I guess, I said that I'm like fasted now, but I guess to be honest, I did have some calories in the form of, I have a third of a pack of keto start, and then I have that with some creatine and acetyl L-carnitine. So I'll have that in the morning, and then bam, I can feel that. Then I make my coffee, walk the dogs, go outside, let the cows out, do that, get like fresh air, sunshine. And then when I come back, after my coffee brewed, I add an MCT based powder. Actually, it has some other things in it. It's called Keto Brains. It has like lion's mane, alpha GPC, and C8 MCT, which is caprylic triglyceride. And just simply consuming that will bump up your ketones. And yeah, I'm a big fan of medium chain triglycerides. We have done quite a bit of work with that. We've published quite a bit of work with medium chain triglycerides. We find that when you take MCTs and add it to a ketone ester, and you take MCTs and add it to a ketone salt and use those combinations in our research, our animal research, we always get much better results because you are stimulating your body's own ketogenesis process with MCTs. Mm-hmm. So that's an important concept while you're delivering exogenous ketones, which will elevate ketones in and of themselves, but you're delivering exogenous ketones while you're stimulating your own. And then the fat from the MCT extends the pharmacokinetic profile. So your ketones stay elevated longer. So,
and do you find that you got to be riding high in the morning with what if I had kept, I find that like when I'm, in a like in ketosis, let's just say, it's almost like a high a little bit, you could feel it. And is this something that, I lost what I was going to ask, but is this something that you feel like you do before workouts, or is this just something you do in the morning?
It's more for like a mental focus, and it allows me to decrease the chatter in my brain. And, maybe I have some
Do you find that it suppresses hunger? I'm sorry. That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Good. Right. Like I am like totally not thinking about food. I'm not hungry now. If I would have eaten breakfast 3 hours ago, I feel like I'd probably be more hungry now than, I skipped breakfast and just had a little bit of MCT from the Keto Brains product, a pinch of ketone salts for the electrolytes and a little bump in ketones. And yeah, I feel, this is the mental state where I'm not overly hyper, but I have like a calm energy, I guess.
Because I think that's what would be very applicable for a lot of people eventually getting to that point where, because really, and I find this too, you've been doing this for so long that when you're suppressing hunger through other, through these ways like you're talking about, that's key for a lot of people if they're looking to, lose inches and, put on some muscle per se. And I don't know. I just think sometimes I've been doing it for so long that I have to almost force myself to eat. Like you said, you wanted to put on weight, so now you're eating 3 times a day. But yeah, I think it's a good tool. But how long do you think it takes to get someone who's maybe gone from the standard American diet into this, great metabolic flexible state of being able to use fat for energy?
That's a good question. I'm glad you brought it up because we find in our scientific research, we have a registered clinical trial looking at low carb ketogenic diets using continuous glucose monitoring. We're using the Levels Health
Okay.
app with Abbott Libre device, which is a CGM. I use a Dexcom G6. So the Levels app works for both. What we find in patients is that it's best to transition them into a ketogenic diet over about 4 to 6 weeks. We have better adherence, better compliance, and then you have a nice transition into this metabolic state instead of, if they go from standard American diet to ketogenic diet in one day, you get the keto flu, your glucose and insulin go down, and then you're not really making ketones yet. That's when like exogenous ketones can help because it helps suppress your appetite, and then it gives your brain energy so you don't get, the brain fog or the keto flu. And then actually just getting ketones into your system helps to ramp up ketolytic, keto adaptive processes. And then, your body will, and it doesn't inhibit your own ketone production unless you take large doses of a ketone ester, which I wouldn't recommend. But, that to train your metabolism after about 4 to 6 weeks is probably the best way to do it. If you're listening to this and you're far from a ketogenic diet and you're getting that standard American 200, 300, 400 grams of carbs a day, that would be the way to do it. Transition after about 4 weeks.
So when you say transition after 4 weeks, you mean gradually maybe lower carbs, sort of change to your macro count? Yeah.
Yep. If you're at 300 grams of carbs a day, knock it down to 150, no sugar, very little starch, maybe go from like, if you're eating 2 or 3 potatoes a day down to just like 1 or half a potato. And then eventually just transition into like, veggies. Think of carbs as just hot fiber. And, for me, I get high fiber fruits. I avoid like bananas and dates and dried fruit and things like that. But I get, different types of berries, occasionally like an apple. And then we have grapefruit trees in the back. Sometimes I'll grab one of them. Our grapefruits are very bitter though. So it's like, they almost have a very little CGM response. I love fruit, and I probably have fruit pretty much every day, but it's all about the amount that you consume. Right.
Yeah. And I know you saw the book, uric acid, what was it? Drop acid. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Got it on my desk here somewhere.
I had doctor, I didn't have, is that Perlmutter? I didn't have, I had Dr. Richard Johnson on, and he talked about you want to eat your fruits. You don't want to drink them.
Yeah. That's a huge problem. And, growing up, we didn't know it that much. If you drink, I remember drinking like, a quart of orange juice, or bringing like a quart of orange juice to school with me and drinking that, or apple juice. It's like basically liquid candy.
Right.
And it's, the CGM responses to this are pretty scary, and they look just like drinking an equal amount of Coke. So there's really no difference. And it's interesting. That's like, should be intuitive, but for most people it's not. They think, oh, orange juice, I'm getting vitamin C, but you're delivering it with like an IV of sugar. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're getting up on time. I'll ask you a question that I normally ask most of my guests. What would you recommend, middle age? I mean, how old are you, Dr. Dominic? I'm curious. You look great.
I'll be 47 soon. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Mid 40s, kind of pushing 50. I feel pretty good. I mean, I kind of feel my age creeping up with me, but I feel like I'm doing everything that I wouldn't do anything different, I guess you would say, for longevity.
Yeah, and I love that. I mean, you look great. My question was, what tip would you give someone getting up there? I'm 41, so let's 40 plus, and they're trying to maybe get back to where they were in their 30s. What maybe one tip would you give that individual? Because you're living it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You know what gets measured gets managed. That term gets thrown around a lot in the entrepreneurial world, I guess. So I think I highly recommend people get blood work to find out where they're at, and then come up with a strategy to determine where they want to go. And then there's many tools out there to do that. We maintain a website, ketonutrition.org. It's not all about the ketogenic diet. I mean, we have quite a few blogs about biomarkers, what needs to be tracked to optimize your metabolic health. So if you get your metabolic health tuned that will be leaps and bounds for enhancing your longevity, your energy, and everything else. So focus on optimizing your metabolic health. But to do that, you need to be tracking, right? And there are different things that you should be tracking. So what I recommend is like know what your fasting glucose is, know what your insulin is, your triglycerides, your HSCRP, which is something you can add that to standard blood work. Just tell your doctor, and sometimes if you tell your doctor, hey, I feel inflamed and can I add this? And then usually your insurance will cover it if you do it like once a year. So your insulin, triglycerides, hemoglobin A1C, fasting glucose, and your blood pressure. Blood pressure is super important. It doesn't get talked about enough. Know your blood pressure and know what elevates your blood pressure and what decreases it. Ketogenic diets are great for decreasing blood pressure. So track these things and optimize them, and then you're basically doing everything you can for, longevity.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think if you don't know where if you don't have a baseline, then you don't really know what you're looking to, where you're looking to go. So I know that's great. Well, so where's the best place for people to find? Is it ketonutrition.org?
Yeah, go there and you'll find me on, Instagram, Dominic D'Agostino KT, I think. And then I'm on Twitter and Facebook, I guess, too. So you can find me there. But Keto Nutrition is kind of like our brand. We don't sell anything, but we do put out information. And I have, grad students and medical doctors help us with some of the articles on there. And we try to give information that's scientifically informative, but actionable too.
Love that. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Tons of great tips. So thanks so much for coming on.
I appreciate you having me, Brian. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I understand there are millions of other podcasts out there and you've chosen to listen to mine, and I appreciate that. Check out the show notes at briangrin.com for everything that was mentioned in this episode. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend or family member that's looking to get their body back to what it once was. Thanks again and have a great day.